Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Left Hook podcast. As always, I'm joined by my great co-host, James.
Hello everyone, hope we're all doing well. Got a pretty interesting show this week, mate.
That we do. It's been a week full of interesting news.
Has it?
It has been.
Has it really?
Yeah, it has
I guess
been.
there was that one big thing that happened, wasn't there?
Yeah.
That one big event that some of our audience may or may not have heard of.
Yes, in North America. Was the presidential election.
Far out, mate. Yes. How do you reckon it went?
How do I reckon it went?
How do you reckon it went?
Well, obviously, most people have realised that Trump has won the presidency. He'll
Yep.
be the president for the next 4 years.
Yep.
But I think we can conclusively say that as much as Trump may have won, the Democrats really lost this election.
I think they did. I think not only did the Democrats lose, I think humanity lost.
Yes.
But I think also even if the Republicans lost the election, I think humanity probably also would have lost.
Correct.
As well.
Yeah. So that we won't spend too much time on the election. It's gone. I think there was just a few little interesting things to add to it. We've got
definitely.
a couple of little interesting clips that kind of, I guess, just, really wrap up the election.
Sum up the whole thing.
They sum it up very well.
So obviously, unlike Trump's first win in 2016, he actually did win the popular vote this time.
Yeah.
So last time in 2016, I believe he lost the popular vote to Hillary Clinton, girl boss extraordinaire number one.
By about 3 million votes.
Yeah.
Yep.
But he proceeded to win the Electoral College vote.
Yes.
Now, any kind of, in my opinion, any rational observer would look and say, hang on a sec, if you got less votes, how on earth did you win the election? And then we were talking about this the other day, about the Electoral College, and how it's essentially an instrument, maybe, shall we say, to kind of prevent any too strong outpouring of democracy, would you say?
Yeah, so the Electoral College is this archaic system where basically the whoever wins the presidency in America, it comes down to Electoral College, and each state that you win, depending on how many senators or representatives there are, you get a certain amount of votes for Electoral College. You get 270 votes, you win. So, as James had just said, last time Trump lost the popular vote, so he received 3 million less votes. This time he received 5 million more votes than Kamala Harris.
Yep.
And he won the Electoral College by, I think it was 40 odd votes.
That's
50
crazy.
votes potentially.
So it was, for American terms, like a landslide, essentially.
And these 7 key battle states that we kept hearing about for the past year or something, he won all those as well. So really decisive victory on his behalf.
Yep.
But as we mentioned at the beginning there, I would firmly conclude that the Democrats lost this.
Yeah.
I would just say that I wasn't alive for either of the Bush administrations, especially Bush Jr., who oversaw the Iraq War, Afghanistan War, and all those other debacles. But I would say that this administration is one of the worst American administrations of my lifetime.
As in the outgoing Democratic administration?
The outgoing Democratic administration.
Yeah.
They oversaw the war in Ukraine.
Yep.
They really kicked that off, did everything possible to ensure that happened.
Yep.
And just kept escalating it.
It's also bitten them in the backside, like domestically, hasn't it? Because there's obviously a lot of discontent at home.
Yeah. And then they also oversaw the ongoing genocide at the moment and the escalation that is the Middle East.
Yes. And I think lots of the kind of liberal democratic pundit class in the US haven't seemed to have grasped that all they had to do was possibly have a bit more of a concrete stance against Israel, be a bit more outspoken about it, and they probably would have been able to retain a large majority of votes, specifically among young people and also amongst Muslim and Arab Americans as well.
Yeah.
So, it's quite interesting. I did find it interesting as well that they had, I believe it was the same campaign strategy team that ran the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016, also ran Kamala's campaign.
That's some good foresight.
Yeah, well, good foresight. Again, if it doesn't work once,
keep going. Yep.
And I think the conditions were quite similar as well. But it obviously shows that as much as you can have this lovely, lofty, progressive rhetoric, if people are feeling the pinch of, inflation, cost of living, seeing, hundreds of billions squandered overseas in these futile wars, then, it doesn't matter if you're black or a woman. It just, people don't really care about that at the end of the day.
No,
I think that's important to know.
They had absolutely no policies.
Yeah.
And whether you like them or not, Trump did. No, he did. He had some policies. He kept
did.
talking about how he was going to lower taxes but increase tariffs. He has this really interesting idea about, putting massive tariffs on Chinese imports and all these things. But they're actual policies, like it's substance.
And it's something different as well.
Obviously, I think it's horrific that he has talked about, mass deportations of Hispanic people and migrants, but it is a policy.
It is.
Where the Democrats there is an issue at the border and they're doing
nothing about
it.
Yeah, essentially. So, and even, obviously, none of them will be allowed to admit that the reason there are these large amounts of immigrants coming over the border is due to, in large part, massive destabilisation, primarily by the United States against the other nations in Central America and South America, specifically Venezuela as well.
Sanctions against the country.
Under the last Trump administration, the massive sanctions package that they levied against Venezuela, after that was put into place, the average earning of a Venezuelan went down to 1% of what it was prior, which obviously causes massive instability. It hasn't toppled the Venezuelan government. I think they're still, as we've discussed in the past, they're still in power. Their population has voted for them as well. But then that would be a little bit too much of an analysis by the United States politicians to actually admit that. So, of course, you just play the handball game back and forth.
Really, what did it for me personally was when I heard Kamala Harris appreciate the endorsement by Dick and Liz Cheney.
Yes.
That was that was genuinely the nail in the coffin.
Yeah.
So Dick Cheney obviously was the vice president under Bush.
He was pretty much running the show.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of a consensus view that he was running the show, essentially.
He oversaw the Iraq War, was pretty much the mastermind behind it.
Of course, yeah.
And what Trump has done really well is kind of create this image as kind of like an anti-establishment, anti-war figure.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you have people like Dick Cheney, who is a war criminal, endorsing Kamala Harris, most ordinary people that see that are going to say, see, this is exact evidence of what Trump's been talking about.
He's got to drain the swamp.
He's got to drain the swamp.
Get rid of the
Kamala
establishment.
Harris is the establishment. She's supported by all these war criminals and goons.
Absolutely,
Yeah, and we had a little video we'll just quickly show.
Yeah,
and when
please.
I saw this, when I saw Kamala Harris saying this, I just thought to myself, that's it. It's over.
I was going to say, that's one good thing about, you can obviously criticise Donald Trump, but one good thing about Kamala is she is just not a very good speaker, dude.
She's not very intelligent.
I think she's about 4 or 5 gins deep. I think they have to get her a couple gins in, or a couple champagnes in, just to get her up on stage. And by that stage, she's cackling and,
So, this is the video.
And I also want to thank your father, Vice President Dick Cheney, for his support and what he has done to serve our country. Every endorsement matters, and this endorsement matters a great deal, Liz, and it carries a special significance because, as you said, we may not see eye to eye on every issue, and we are going to get back to a healthy two-party system, I am sure of that, where we will have vigorous debates. And as you said, you may not have supported a Democrat for president before, but as you have also said, we both love our country and we revere our democratic ideals.
Bro.
That really says it all, doesn't it?
That really hurt, dude. That was painful. Watching her say that and the content of what she was saying, that hurt. That hit me right.
Especially to really appreciate what your father's done to serve this country.
Yeah, man. Dude, if Dick Cheney came out to me and said, Jim, I love what you're doing, I would just immediately do the exact opposite of what I have been doing. How could you take an endorsement
and
her
comments about going back to a healthy two-party system where we have, honest and open debates.
Yes.
Come on.
It's amazing. Well, speaking of which, there was another very funny clip, or that I found hilarious personally, and it's some pundits on NBC speaking of robust two-party debates, essentially discussing what the Democrat strategy should be going forwards into the next election cycle. If you could whip that one out, please, mate.
last night won first-time voters by 9 points. It's a swing of almost 40 points. There's so much in these numbers to sift through, but at the end of the day, Donald Trump grew his margins in almost every county where he won. He won in places people were shocked to see him win, counties around in New Jersey and New York and Illinois. Just an overwhelming victory.
I think it's interesting. I saw a lot of it with my friends' kids. They're college kids who graduated college, early 20s, first-time voters. And I think I go back to what I said earlier. To them, he was going to solve their problem. And I think particularly for young male voters, his strength, he's going to fix it. He's going to solve it. I don't care about anything else. And I also think a lot of young people are also fed up with very super progressive attitudes. I think the Democrats, Joe, going back to your initial question, and you may disagree with this, I think they need to move to the center. I think the
What does that mean, though, when you said...
So, the Democrats need to move further to the centre, which would, by that gentleman there, I believe his name's Donny Deutsch, by his logic, would mean there is even less light between the two parties.
Correct.
Not that there's much there now,
Yes.
but there needs to be even less, which perfectly aligns with what Kamala's statement of we need to bring back healthy two-party debates or whatever shit she was just dribbling, pardon me. Hilarious.
Yeah, it is.
You know, it's really interesting, and I think I've been theorising about this, and we've talked about this a lot, the whole purpose of the two-party system seems to be to essentially just move things further and further to the right.
Yeah.
Given the media's ability to manufacture consent and create domestic political space for certain policies and against certain policies, we see there seems to just be a gradual rightward shift.
Correct.
I wouldn't have called the Democrats, even by Australian standards, I wouldn't have called the Democrats a left-wing party. I'd have called them, maybe centre-right.
Yeah.
I've said this before, I'd probably call the Republicans like an extremist organisation. But again, Democrats moving further to the right, that is not going to help any of their voter base that they were trying to appeal to anyway, with even the fake progressive rhetoric.
That's right. And Bernie Sanders just pointed this out after the election was lost, and Kamala conceded. He said that, well, I told you so. If you provide no progressive policies, if you provide no hope to young people in working class America, what do you think they're going to do? And that's exactly what the Democrats didn't do. They provided sweet apple and they got hammered for it. So.
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, like all the main kind of power brokers and donors in the United States, it's not going to change. They're not going to be affected. No. It doesn't matter if they voted Republican or Democrat. The majority of them are not going to be affected at all. Their profits will still keep increasing.
Yeah, well, I will just quickly add, did you see, I think it was the CEO of BlackRock, I believe?
Yeah.
Came out the other day and said that nothing's going to fundamentally change right at the end of the election.
Yes.
So that says it all.
That says it all, guys.
It really does wrap it
It's also
up.
the most healthy, robust democracy in the world. And one more little fact to point out is that, I'm just checking my notes, please excuse me. So the Don, Big Don, and not Don Bradman, unfortunately. If we had Don Bradman, I'd be chuffed that he won. But the Don Trump, he won 75 million votes. Kamala won about 70 million votes.
Yeah.
That equals 145 million. That's less than half of the US population. So over like half the people in the country just weren't having a bar of it. You know what I mean? And just have obviously just checked out and they're just rolling with it, I think.
And that really is quite concerning for the future of American democracy.
Yeah, and if people don't want to participate, which obviously the majority of the country doesn't want to participate, unfortunately.
So what sort of went unnoticed was as one election cycle was finishing up in the US, another was beginning here in Australia.
Yes, that's right. So we've got our elections coming up.
We've got our elections coming up, I believe, in May, June next year. And Albo, while the US presidential elections were wrapping up, put forward some legislation that he's proposed that he will run for the next election.
Ah, interesting, of course, mate. And is this good legislation, do you think? Fill me in, Jordie. Give me the dates.
I would say that we here at Left Hook Media believe that any sort of constructive and progressive legislation is good.
Yep.
But there's a fine line between pissing in the wind and actually providing substance within your legislation.
Yep.
And this is on the precipice.
Yeah.
So 20%, James, 20% is the figure. That is the statistic.
20%.
20% is the amount that Albo has proposed to wipe off HECS and student loans if re-elected next year. Wow. And that will include trade support loans for all people that have got a trade support loan as a tradie or any sort of HECS debts. which, interesting, there are 3 million people in Australia with HEX loans. 75% of them are under the age of 30.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I guess that could potentially, actually make a noticeable difference to especially young people who are struggling with cost of living, trying to buy houses, etc., that sort of
Correct.
thing.
Yeah.
So that could fundamentally make a bit of a difference, I guess.
Yes, I think so. Look, it's a lot better than nothing. A couple things, though. It will only be people with existing debts, not people that incur future debts or start university after the legislation is enacted. It's better than nothing.
It is.
Correct?
Yeah, that does seem interesting, actually.
Yeah, so obviously he's using this to appeal to students and younger people, which I think are becoming more and more disenfranchised with the Labor Party and are possibly voting for the Greens or other independents. So he's definitely trying to...
Well, because they have lost definitely a large portion of the working class vote.
Yeah, they have. That's right. Except... Once again, I'm not sure whether this will potentially win him those votes because I think most young people at university are either voting possibly for the Greens or the Labor Party. The small percentage that are in business and commerce or are building weapons of death to fuel a genocide might vote for the Liberal Party.
Yep.
So I don't think he's going to buy a lot of votes there.
No, of course.
But it's an issue that has to be addressed because more and more young people are getting into crippling debt. They can't afford to buy homes. And that is also crippling our economy because the more student debt you have to repay, the less you can put back into the economy.
Actually
to
buying.
stimulate demand.
Yeah, goods and services,
That's
etc.
right.
Because there's a interesting stat that I've heard, and we've talked about this before, but I think it's the government makes more money on HEX debt, student loan, trade support loan repayments every year than fossil fuels, is it?
Yes, than taxes on fossil fuels that we have here in Australia.
That's a rough one.
Yes.
That hurts.
Should just add that it was under the Hawke government in 1988. The HEX was reintroduced and they scrapped heavily subsidised university.
Hawke really, he's kind of looked back on, and I think they've crafted his image as kind of being this kind of...
The larrikin, the Australian larrikin that can neck a beer.
Yeah, can neck a beer.
And that's why most Liberal Party voters, or most Australians that don't like the Labor Party, they reminisce over him.
Yeah, the good old days of Bob Hawke when you could just sexually assault, your assistant, neck a beer, just be pissed half the time.
That's right.
Look, these are all good, wholesome Australian traits. Minus the sexual assault, that's obviously awful. We condemn that. But it's really interesting how he's looked back on. But then you actually look at his policies that he implemented, and that was kind of the start of neoliberalism in Australia, I guess, as well, of what we would consider kind of mass financialisation and less government support.
That's right,
and subsidies, etc., etc.
So some really interesting statistics actually from the ATO, from the tax office, that the statistics show that the number of people with student loans exceeding $100,000 is skyrocketing. The figure is almost 57,000 people, up from 47,000 the last year, and more than double the 22,000 in 2018. So in the past 6 years, the number of people with over $100,000 worth of university debt has doubled.
Wow. Yep. That's crazy.
That's not because more people are going to university per se, it's just because the actual cost is just skyrocketing.
But then again, to bring back to your point, if you're in $100,000 debt for university, that sucks.
Yes.
But if you get 20% of that taken off and then you're in $80,000 debt, it still sucks.
Yeah.
Obviously it's going to be better, but with that being indexed for inflation, it's that's still a massive chunk of your pay, essentially.
Oh, of course.
That you have to sacrifice.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they've also increased the amount that you have to earn before you start paying back your debt, which doesn't actually address the debt itself.
The problem.
Yeah. Then it's just going to incur more indexation annually as well. So
unless you could fly under the radar, and Left Hook Media does not endorse this, but fly under the radar, never earn more than $50,000 a year, taxable legally, ding, and then just never pay back your HEX, maybe move overseas, get a job overseas.
You can't, maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you could sort of do that. You cannot do that anymore.
Yeah,
you can't really earn under $50,000 and hope to survive in this modern economy.
Yeah, that's it, man.
Yeah.
Well, it's going to be interesting. Hopefully they don't fall prey to, and I'm saying this not because I specifically support the Labor Party, but because I do want more progressive policies put into place. Hopefully they don't fall into the trap that the Democrats did in the last election and just run on these kind of meagre promises without addressing the real systematic issues
No,
at play.
of course, that's it. Look,
that will cost them the election.
Yeah, as I said, it's sort of sitting on the precipice of pissing in the wind. I do think that 20% is a decent amount. I think it's good. It needs to be done. The other thing was that a source told the Sydney Morning Herald that the Labor Party next year are going to run on reforms to TAFE, further restructuring tertiary education, early childcare, I believe, and I think that was it. So,
well, those are all good policies.
Correct. That's exactly right.
But
it's taken them.
It's taken them 3 years?
3 years almost,
to get there.
Yes.
But again, if the systematic problems are still at play, then we're still going to have our super right wing, monopoly media focusing on these issues as wedge issues.
That's right.
And then we're still going to have this really uncharismatic boiled potato of a man that is Peter Dutton, the opposition leader, who is also worth $400 million. Essentially a slumlord, owns heaps of properties, owns commercial properties. We're going to have this less than desirable man.
Yeah, that's right. So, look, at least the Labor Party is trying to legislate something and address this problem, something we will not see under the Liberals.
The Libs. No, I believe Dutto, the man himself, is running on some of his main kind of policy points. They're going to be like scrapping overtime pay, public holiday pay, rights for like casual and part-time workers.
Yeah.
Just these real kind of like chilly 1973 kind of policies.
Yeah.
Like,
so these were released at the beginning of the week. I thought they were interesting. We should address them. We will next look at what the Liberal Party are proposing, and we'll get into that.
Yep.
So the next statistic I'll throw at you is 16.
16.
The age 16.
Jordie, let's not go there, mate. Come on.
So 16 is the age that they're going to restrict youths to access social media.
All right. I don't have any issues with that.
Do you have any issues with that?
Oh, I'm sure there will. I'm sure there's going to be, some fine print somewhere. Let's restrict social media. We're also giving $100 billion to Israel. In the fine print. It's not one of those.
No, not one of those.
All right, not that extreme.
So no, this is quite extreme. It's quite radical. I
think that's a good idea, by the way.
We are the first country in the quote unquote West to put forward such extreme legislation.
Communism.
France did this a couple of years ago, and I think the proposed age was 14 or 16, but you were able to get around it by getting parental consent. There will be no ifs, buts, or candy nuts. If you are 16 or younger, you'll not be able to access social media. So
that's a good policy.
Yeah, I think it's going to garner a lot of popular support. I think a lot of people are going to support this. So we've seen in the past year now, there's been a nationwide ban on mobile phones and smart devices in all public schools.
Also a fantastic idea, I reckon.
Yeah, a lot of students and a lot of staff have said that it's been constructive. I was also reading that the jury is not out, that there hasn't been heaps of conclusive peer-reviewed evidence to support that it actually helps students be more attentive in school. However, I think it is a good idea in some way or another.
I personally cannot see how that wouldn't be more constructive.
No.
And that's just I haven't been at school in, 10 years.
Well, one of the critiques was that you shouldn't necessarily ban them. You should just teach kids to actually be able to use smart devices responsibly as an adult.
But then you look at the adults that are trying to teach these kids, and these adults are out there doing selfies and TikTok dances.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
I understand.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting because we are the first Western country, and I was looking at this earlier, and it was interesting to see that a lot of the news reports were coming from CNN and other major Western news sources that were like, whoa, look what Australia is doing. This is kind of,
radical.
Yeah.
I wonder if the big tech companies will be fighting this. Is this something they'll be against? Because I think, obviously, they always kind of say, oh, you have to be 16 or older to use Facebook, but then, you just change your birth. If you're a child under, you just change your birth date to be older.
Yes.
So I wonder if this is something that they'll be lobbying against, which I'd imagine they would be, just because less users.
So this was announced at the beginning of the week, last Monday. There are 2 weeks left of Parliament. They potentially will try and pass this by the end of the year as kind of like a win for 2024. The opposition under Dutton has said that they will support it.
That's good. That is good.
Yeah.
Anytime there's consensus, I get a little bit worried. But it seems like this one is such like a good win. Like it's such a good popular. It is popular enough that there's bipartisan support.
Yeah, that's right. I think they're just seeing how disruptive social media has been.
Yeah.
Especially, I think in our generation, we're just kind of old enough that we sort of missed it.
Just
it was just
over the bad
we were
parts.
using social media when we were that age, but it wasn't like
I don't think it was as
wasn't as
all
toxic
inclusive,
as well as it is now.
It's still definitely toxic. But everyone is still, has anxiety and shit, but not as bad as these.
Interesting. This will obviously affect apps such as Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. It's going to stop all these young TikTokers in school. X, Twitter, and what I thought was interesting is that it most likely is going to affect YouTube as well.
That's fair enough.
It is fair
That
enough.
is fair
Yeah, I
enough,
know.
yeah.
But I thought a lot of young people do watch YouTube, so
There you go.
it's going to be a sting and a thorn in the side.
The side, We'll see what happens, I guess. And again, we've seen what happened in Brazil recently when the Brazilian Supreme Court judge, I think, ruled to ban X. And big backlash, but you could also see there was a very concerted effort by all the media companies demonising the Brazilian government and these policies. And
Yeah, but there's a bit of history here as well. Australia, the government has obviously taken it to big tech in the past, trying to force them to pay our media companies here in Australia to display Australian-sourced media, obviously helping such as Rupert Murdoch and all the other major corporate news outlets here. So we're not it seems that the Australian government in some ways not really afraid to just kind of go head on into this.
Oh, good. Someone needs to do it.
What was interesting, though, obviously here in the West, this is a very radical proposal. However, there's another country that has hit this real hard, real quick a couple of years ago. China. So there was sweeping restrictions on young people playing video games. There was a limit, I think, of 3 to 6 hours of video games per week. So there was that initially. And then just recently this year, they have now partnered with all the major app developers and smart device manufacturers to now restrict access of people under the age of 8 to smart devices.
That's fantastic.
And they're only going to be able to access them for educational purposes, which is interesting because China is such a strong government. It's able to intervene into the side of development and production and make sure that companies are actually building apps to suit younger people like that.
And also, benefit and assist in development as opposed to just...
And I have to admit this, look, in some ways I think this does need to be addressed. One thing I did find a little bit dystopian was that some companies, this is not the Chinese government, this is private companies, but what they were doing now was basically if you wanted to sign up to play, to sign up for EA games or a video game company or software, you had to use facial recognition to prove that you were over the age of 16. Because heaps of people were getting around the ban by using their older brothers or parents' accounts to play video games. There you go. So now they're implementing facial recognition.
Even then, though, man, that's a toughie. Because I knew some Greek kids in high school that had beards at 12. But then again, China has good facial recognition.
So I thought that was interesting.
Bloody oath, mate. As I've said before, pro-China, anti-TikTok. So before we move on to the rest of our international coverage, I did just want to bring it back to the Don, the situation in the United States. And I found this very funny. So pretty much within the last 2 days, I saw this on the news yesterday morning, but I actually saw on the news there was a foiled assassination attempt against Trump. Very conveniently timed. Obviously, this is, it's kind of a meme at this stage. It's like, latest assassination attempt on Trump just dropped, whatever. However, this is quite interesting. I find this very politically and very interestingly timed, and my kind of spidey senses started tingling straight away. So, immediately, the Justice Department announced they thwarted the plot, supposedly by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps to kill Trump. So
this is the Iranian military?
Yes. Yep. So supposedly there was a 51-year-old Afghani man whose name was Fahad Shakeri. So he currently lives in Tehran, is what they believe. And supposedly, according to documents, he was tasked by the IRGC with carrying out assassinations on US and Israeli citizens. However, in September, they told him to focus solely on Trump. What I find very interesting is I scoured the internet this morning doing the notes for this, and every single website, mainstream site, was essentially a boilerplate, just the exact same article. There was no nuance, and it was all just saying court documents. So court documents have revealed this. Court documents have revealed this. no direct quotes of said court documents.
Yeah.
Right, which again is quite fascinating. And I also found it interesting because from the vagueness of this article, they have said that Sha'Carri has actually been in contact with federal, like the FBI or whatever, in the United States, and that is when he revealed this information to them, which I do find quite funny. So I believe he does have a record. He was arrested in 2008, I think, for like a petty crime or something like that, and then supposedly he recruited to carry out this assassination attempt 2 more people that he met in jail who both reside in the US, and they've both been arrested since then. However, but now obviously Sha'Carri's, they reckon he's in Iran. I find it very interesting that I'm assuming, from what I could discern from reading these articles, in between his original arrest and in between now, he has spoken to the US government in talks to them and revealed this plan to them before supposedly fleeing the country.
Yes.
So to me, none of this makes any sense whatsoever. So not only does the FBI and the various intelligence services in the United States have a very long and sordid history of essentially, manipulating informants and fabricating things like this. A quick example I can bring up would be the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. I cannot for the life of me remember the gentleman's name, but the man who perpetrated the whole thing was essentially known by the FBI the entire time. He was possibly an informant. He was definitely an asset, and it's kind of almost obvious that he was... one can discern that he was essentially allowed to do this.
So the FBI have a track record.
Yes, a very strong track record.
Of manufacturing intelligence and using people
Yes.
as a proxy for their ends.
Of course.
Yes.
I find it very interestingly timed, of course, because Donald Trump has very specifically doing all the podcasts and stuff that he was doing in the lead up to the election. Same with JD Vance. They've all said, like, specifically, loud and clear, we do not want to escalate in the Middle East. We want to bring end to the wars, et cetera, et cetera. Obviously, you take that with a grain of salt anyway, but that was a kind of like a pretty key kind of pillar of their policy. I do find it interesting because now that this has come out, this news has come out, that would provide very convenient political leeway for them to initiate an attack on Iran and or... assist Israel at the whims of the Israelis in further attacking Iran as well and further provoking. We know that that's been the Israeli strategy the entire time. And I think it was kind of looking like it was getting to the stage where even the military in the US said, obviously the political leadership, wanted to go ahead with it because none of them can sleep at night unless there's men dying in the Middle East, for their donors. And I think I presume they have all made blood oaths to these various demons and deities that put them into power, that they have to provide them with, 1 million souls a year, etc. And maybe they haven't met their quota. Anyways, nuke Iran, that's the... so that seems to be the, the MO. So it'd be interesting how this plays out. I do find it interesting as well. The other 2 assassination attempts against Trump, in my opinion, there was definitely enough sketchy stuff about what wasn't revealed. About what wasn't revealed, about the parts that were left out that make you question the legitimacy and the involvement of various other actors within the US. And I find this one, the information that they included, has kind of also, for me, kind of leaves a bit of doubt. But also... to the legitimacy of the claim as a whole.
That's right.
Makes sense. So I just thought that was really interesting.
It is.
And I think we're definitely going to have to pay attention to that because if, they thwart another Iranian assassination attempt next week and then they go, we have to go to war with Iran, that's just too convenient.
And it's very reminiscent of Russiagate as well.
It's so
and the way
reminiscent.
these intelligence agencies cook up really false intelligence to be able to kind of manipulate their foreign policy and also create, kind of division with inside America as well.
And again, you look at the Syria war, Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan. It's just the same playbook. Vietnam, whatever.
Well, what I will say, though, is that it's going to be very interesting the next couple of years.
And Trump has also said, one more note before we move on, Trump, the Don... I actually read this today. There were rumorings in the last couple of days that he was going to bring Mike Pompeo back on.
Yes.
I did see he tweeted earlier today that that's not happening.
Okay.
So look, again, a small win for humanity.
Yeah.
But still, again, they can just replace him with Mike Pompeo, who'll do the exact same thing.
So that's a wrap then for the US.
Yeah.
What has been happening around the world then?
Well, there's been a couple other interesting things that I have been looking at.
Yep.
Specifically, one was the massive series of floods in Spain over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So this has actually been devastating. For people that don't know, I think it started on like the 29th of October, and they've just had there was a massive storm front over the kind of southeast corner of Spain, in which has seen torrential downpours. There was one place where there was about, I think they estimated 20 months worth of rain in 8 hours. And this has caused massive havoc, like hundreds of thousands of cars destroyed, tens of thousands of buildings destroyed. 223 people at last count have been killed. And initially over 2,000 people were reported missing. So the government in Valencia, which was the hardest hit, that's an autonomous region. So the way it works is they are kind of given resources by the central government, and then they have the autonomy to, deploy those resources where they see fit. I will say it's interesting though that the president of the Valencian government, Carlos Mazon, so they've been quite heavily criticised because firstly they didn't essentially declare a state of emergency and like the flood warning until the day after it kind of really hit. So all these people, they were getting rained on heavily, and there was, things were starting to flood, but the government hadn't said anything to them.
People were still going to work. Going about their day normally.
Yep. And then you had people, in underground car parks, for example, just getting absolutely flooded out. Like really sad. And then obviously, so he was getting criticised. Another thing he's been criticised for is he actually disbanded the Valencia Emergency Unit, which was created by the person that his predecessor before him, who was from a different party, who was more of a left-leaning. This guy's more of a right-leaning kind of political figure, and he's obviously disbanded this emergency task force within Valencia, which is again there specifically for things like this. So there's been massive criticisms of the central government. Pedro Sanchez, the Prime Minister, and also the King Felipe IV have also, and the royal couple have gone in to, kind of try and see what's going on, try and console victims, obviously kind of not lose too much face politically, where they've deployed 10,000 personnel from the Spanish army, which is the biggest peacetime deployment ever in Spanish history. However, there's been lots of very unhappy people that are very unhappy with the government. So Pedro Sanchez was assaulted by a man with a shovel, which is wild because, one, he actually went out of his security kind of detail and, broke protocol to go and speak to people. He was assaulted by a man with a shovel. His car was vandalised. Now, he downplayed the incident, but apparently there were a lot of kind of right-wing groups that were there. There was a dude who was supposedly the leader of a neo-Nazi group in these protests, kind of meet Sanchez. Sanchez is kind of like a centre-left kind of figure. And then also King Felipe. And so him and the royal couple, they were all pelted with mud. Like people were calling them murderers. The Spanish, they're pretty fiery people, obviously. People calling them murderers, throwing sticks at them, throwing mud at them. Again, Sanchez was hit by a shovel. But also the king was seen talking to a young man wearing a Blue Division T-shirt, which this isn't really that significant, but I think it's funny. The Blue Division, for people that do not know, were like a contingent of the Spanish military that went and fought for the Germans in the Second World War to fight on the Eastern Front. Obviously, Spain was ruled by a fascist dictator at the time. And they were... Even though they declared neutrality, they still provided support. And it's kind of the Spanish nationalists really romanticise this.
Can I just say that? This is very Spanish, isn't it? So we have a Spanish king, a monarch. We have a fascist sympathiser. We have potentially a Spanish peasant throwing a shovel at the Prime Minister. And then other Spaniards throwing mud as well.
The whole
this
thing,
is very Spanish.
It's a very Spanish affair. It's a very Spanish affair. What, however, is decidedly un-Spanish, right? And this is actually what I think the meat of this kind of segment comes to, is the economic damage that was undertaken, that was, the amount of agricultural land that was destroyed by this. So I think I read one thing saying 40,000 hectares of agricultural land were like just destroyed. Massive. So Spain is Europe's biggest producer of citrus, tomatoes, like olives, persimmon, one of the biggest in the world.
Yeah.
They're also the world's biggest exporter of olives and olive oil.
Yep.
So we have been lamenting in Australia the high price of olive oil, which sounds like a bit of a joke, but it's literally doubled in price over the last 3 years since COVID.
It's doubled in price.
So this will drastically increase the olive oil prices. This is bad news.
It's going to hit you deep.
This will hit me deep.
This
will hit me deep. But it's also interesting because, for example, when you look at like globalized food security, for example, Britain, the UK, they get 25% of their fruit and 8% of vegetables from Spain.
Yeah.
So that's not just a little bit. It's not just like, there was a storm in Central America and we can't get mangoes for a few months. That's a big chunk.
Have you come across in your readings, or do you think that this storm was intensified by climate change?
Well, that's a tricky one because the way I look at this, and I'm reading just coincidentally a very interesting book about the effects of climate change, Tropic of Chaos by Christian Parenti. Audience, go out, read it. Absolute banger. But he talks about it's not necessarily each individual event, but it is the combination and the severity of the events overall and the trend. That is kind of where you would find it kind of evident that it was caused by like these. It's all going to exacerbate it. So Spain has had big floods before. I think there was one in like the 40s or 50s. There's been a few big ones, but this is the biggest one in recent memory. Yeah. But again, it's also
the frequency and the scale is probably going to intensify.
And we're also noticing droughts are more common.
Yeah.
So there is obviously lots more precipitation, and this isn't necessarily just Spain. This is lots of part of the world. You might actually be getting, because warm air carries more moisture, so you might actually be getting more precipitation overall, but it doesn't fall regularly. You don't have regular raining seasons.
Or evenly, of course.
Or evenly, so you just get massive monsoons, you know what I mean, massive storms, and then that obviously destroys the soil, erodes the soil faster, and then obviously more agricultural societies, they get hit the hardest by it as well.
And then, as you said, in this age of globalization, more and more countries rely on food imports, and then their food security is compromised.
And food exports as well.
Yeah.
You know, if you're like, that's a massive economic hit to the to the Spanish economy. That's crazy.
Yeah.
So the Spanish government did, I think they announced like a €10 billion package to the victims, which is that's actually quite a significant amount. But again, I think these things are just going to become more and more frequent going into the future, and we all have to, I guess, just be prepared and not get too complacent. These things are going to keep happening, and I guess there is obviously any government can't stop weather events like this, but there are certain structural ways you can mitigate.
Curating legislation that tries to address climate change.
And also having, stockpiles of food, of resources. There's a lot. And it goes beyond just like lowering your CO2.
Yeah, of course.
It's the whole system has to be analysed. Another quick point I wanted to, so moving over to another Spanish-speaking country in the other side of the world, there is a crisis going on in Bolivia at the moment. This has been going on for the last couple of months. We originally covered in one of our earlier episodes the coup attempt in Bolivia.
Yeah.
And we kind of had a bit of speculation about what was behind that, whether they were international forces or domestic forces. To be honest, I'm actually thinking it's looking more and more like these might have been domestic political forces in Bolivia, because there is essentially a split between the ruling MAS party, the Movement to Socialism Party, that was founded by Evo Morales, who is the president, I think, from 2006 to 2019, I believe. Super popular, first indigenous president in the Americas, massive reforms, social reforms. Essentially, they started, should we say, fighting back against financialized, globalized capital that ruled their country, ruled their resources. So Bolivia is actually a food self-sufficient country.
Yep. So potentially a Hugo Chavez or a Fidel Castro of Bolivia.
And followed, again, the pink tide in the late 90s, early 2000s in Latin America. So he actually left the governing role in 2019 because there were allegations of like electoral corruption. I don't know the specifics, completely honest, but Luis Arce, who is his the man who has preceded him, he has been kind of doing, essentially following those similar policies. But what's happened is it appears there's a big split in between these two factions of the party. So you've had Morales has come back. He's had massive support throughout the country, and he has, since they started blocking off highways. It was reported they captured a military base near the city of Cochabamba, and 200 soldiers were taken hostage. These people had weapons and stuff like that as well. They're blocking off highways. At the same time, he also reported that a Bolivian, a police officer, an army officer, tried to assassinate him as well. So really messy situation. I've tried to do a bit of study, but I don't think anyone really actually knows what's going on. But it does seem to be more of a factional domestic kind of incident. And I think that also you can kind of infer the conclusion from the earlier coup attempt that maybe that was a domestic false flag. It didn't have the same support and resources behind it that US interventions have had specifically in Bolivia in the past. So we'll have to wait and see. Me personally, I think Bolivia is a pretty cool country, and I think even though it's a very poor country, it is a country that has remained sovereign and had control over its wealth and its resources, has fought back control, and is pushing forwards to their own agenda. And I do worry that the more fracturing there is internally, the more at risk that system will be moving forwards. I just thought it was interesting because no one covers it. And it is quite
of course. And Bolivia is a good example of how a state can use its natural resources responsibly.
Exactly.
Keep wealth in its own country and produce its own manufacturing base using those resources.
Absolutely.
So,
and those are all super important things.
All right. So,
mate.
Last segment for today.
Last segment. To finish off, Jordie, it wouldn't be an episode of Left Hook Podcast if we didn't talk about Zionists, would it?
No.
So you actually, I'm not sure if you've seen this, but over the last 2 days or so, there has been these horrific headlines that to the less kind of politically astute observer in the Western press, you think, my goodness, this is Holocaust 2.0. I've seen headlines like pogroms in Amsterdam, anti-Semitic violence, etc., etc. And look, as you're a normal kind of liberal, kind of mum or dad that, likes to be well informed, you read this and just go, oh, this is absolutely horrible. These Arabs are getting out of control. There's a bit more to the story.
Yeah. So can I stop you? Do you know how I knew that there was a story behind this as well? Because I was at the gym the other day on the treadmill and I looked up and one of the corporate stations, I think it was Channel 9 and 10, were covering this and they had quite a large segment on it.
Yeah, they did. The Zionists are really running out of, there's not much sympathy left for them. They've almost drained the global sympathy tank from the population. They're really trying to fill it back up again with this one. The way the story was reported, there are a bunch of Israeli fans of the football team. They're called Maccabi Tel Aviv, and they were playing a game against Ajax, which is the Dutch football team. Yeah. You're a fan of football. You probably know more about this than I do. Anyways, it was reported that essentially they went to a game in the Netherlands and a large group of Israeli supporters were essentially chased down in the streets, beaten up by Arabs, I saw one thing, I think Mark Rutte, who's the right wing, he's the president, prime minister of the Netherlands, he just had a tweet about this is horrible, we cannot allow anti-Semitism again. I can't believe we're seeing, Arabic men with Palestinian flags chasing these poor defenseless Jews down the street and bashing them. And so, if you're just a standard observer, you see this and you think, mate, this is awful, this has to stop. Let Israel keep genociding the Arabs. I think that's the kind of the logical progress that they want that to go. Yeah. So a bit more to the story. Turns out what happens is, so before the game, essentially these are a bunch of ultras, football hooligans. Yeah,
which are usually very ultra-nationalist right-wing.
They are, but I have also seen some very especially Germany and stuff, it's very progressive kind of ultras. But it's a big part of European football culture, obviously. Yes. You have these really vocal, quite bombastic support bases, and they kind of, in the true British spirit, they go and have a little bit of a tussle before the game. But these are a massive part of these teams' support bases. So what happened? This group of ultras flew into Amsterdam. On arrival, they started conducting rallies throughout the streets, yelling racist chants, ripping Palestinian flags off the off houses, because in the Netherlands there are a lot of people that support the Palestinian cause. Ripping flags off the houses, etc.
There's videos available of this on social media. On Twitter X, there are videos of them parading through with Israeli flags, chanting death to Arabs.
Yes, and chanting these crazy slogans. So one of the slogans, and I've heard this before, and I think this is an Israeli nationalist slogan, bit messed up in my opinion. The slogan was, "There are no schools in Gaza because there are no children left." Another one being, "F you terrorists, Sinwar die, everybody die." Just, again, pretty provocative.
Just vulgar.
Just vulgar. Anyways, at this game as well. So this was carrying on in the hours before the game and in the hours after the game. During the game itself, just before the kickoff, they had a moment of silence for all the people that passed away that were killed during these recent floods in Spain.
Yeah.
During this moment of silence, this massive group of Israeli ultras were booing, chanting, not giving a moment of silence, essentially. I'm not sure if they were just deliberately trying to provoke, or if maybe they're showing their dissatisfaction with the Spanish government's criticisms of Israel, because not many European nations have come out openly and actually criticised.
But Spain has.
Spain and Ireland as well. So I believe Spain's actually stopping ships docking in the Spanish ports that are from the US that are headed towards Israel. And so as a result of these, these provocations, and I think what a lot of people in the Netherlands saw as a foreign group coming there and, kicking up chaos in their community, many Amsterdam locals called Amsterdammers, very important to note, not just Muslims, not just Arabs or Moroccans, etc., and this is a quote from an Amsterdam councilman named Jazzy Veldhuizen, said, "The Amsterdammers organised themselves and countered the attack." So that kind of paints quite a different picture. And there are videos on YouTube and stuff, and you can go out and watch this as well, where it doesn't just show these Israelis getting these kind of vulgar football hooligans getting attacked, but it shows the kind of disgusting things they were saying and doing beforehand as well. So it kind of adds a bit more context as well. Another really interesting thing to note is the Jerusalem Post itself, an Israeli newspaper, announced or reported that amongst the gang of ultras, there were Mossad agents present, right? And also there were people who were in the IDF.
Agent provocateurs.
Again, impossibly. That's what you'd have to assume. I just want to say quickly, we don't condone violence against anyone, nationality, race, etc. But yeah, so you have to think, you're a bit less cynical than I am when it comes to kind of this sort of analysis. And obviously I try and be realistic, but I believe the Israelis are really cynical. So when I see stuff like that, I think, well, look, how much of this was essentially kind of an engineered tactic to produce these kind of results to then galvanise more public support for Israel in general. We'll probably never know, as with most of these things, but it does seem to be an ongoing habit of the Zionists to insert themselves into a foreign land,
stir up hatred and animosity, and then pull the victim card.
Pull the victim card again. It's wild. It's wild. But yeah, look, we can just all hope everyone be a bit more astute when watching the media, try and kind of analyse the different power interests at play and make up your own mind, and obviously don't just look at one source. I think that's very important across all subjects as well.
Of course, and for better or worse, it's interesting to see that it's on social media, on platforms, especially Twitter X, that you do get to see kind of both sides of the story and what's actually going on.
Absolutely.
Where when you do watch corporate news, you just get this really curated story of what happened, of these kind of, as you said, these anti-Semitic pogroms taking place.
Pogroms.
It's crazy.
I also think one thing that's funny is lots of these right-wing European leaders that are in power now that are, putting their full-throated support behind the Zionist state and condemning anti-Semitism. These would have been the people that in the 1930s were conducting anti-Semitism, because it's the same political move to demonise a certain group. It's just different times and different groups.
I just had a thought, actually. This is kind of a concluding note. Just tying it back to our segment earlier when we were talking about the social media ban. Interesting, a lot of young people, for example, if that ban had been enacted earlier, wouldn't have seen the genocide taking place.
That's a very good
point. Over the past year on TikTok, for example.
That is a very good point.
So, something to take note and think about.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. All right.
Well, bloody oath. Jordie? another good show, mate. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us. I will be not present for the next couple of weeks. However, we do have a special co-host who will be filling in for me.
He'll be joining me. That'll be a surprise.
We look forward to that.
Looking forward to it. Adios, everyone. Like, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Ciao.